Open enrollment for Medicare is finally upon us, that fun time of the year. Today we're going to arm you with the 7 things to consider when choosing a Medicare plan. It's that time of the year, mid-October comes around, and all of a sudden, those that are 65 or older really have to start considering how to purchase and look at Medicare coverage. We just had a lunch and learn last week. We brought in Kelly Blythe, a specialist with Medicare. We always recommend using somebody that all they do is Medicare, and that's all she does. But today what we wanted to do is help arm you with the ability to understand if you're considering a Medicare coverage, a Medicare plan, what are some critical components to actually think through? So we have a list of 7 for you today. This will be actually in our written commentary as well if you want to reference the written piece. All right, so the first component we want to consider is obviously costs. And when I say costs, I'm not just talking about premiums, the monthly amount that you pay for coverage. We also want to think about costs in a more comprehensive way. So are there deductibles for your plans, co-insurance amounts for your plans? Are there maximum out-of-pockets for each plan? So one thing to think through with a traditional Medicare policy, there really typically isn't any sort of maximum out-of-pocket cap unless you buy what they call a Medigap plan. It's really critical when we think about costs. It's not just a monthly premium that we're thinking through. It's the all-encompassing everything else cost that naturally comes along with the overall out-of-pocket expenses that you may experience with regards to whatever plan you might choose. The second component that we want to think through obviously is the coverage that you need and or want through whatever plan you choose to work with. So one thing that is, thinking this is the services that will be provided by each plan. Thinking through, original Medicare versus a Medicare Advantage plan. With original Medicare, you got parts A and B, and there's going to be some critical things covered. But there are potentially some advantages to utilizing a Medicare Advantage plan if you want additional services covered above and beyond what traditional Medicare coverage is. So when you're going through and associating costs, like I said in point 1, we also want to think through coverage. What are those services that are covered underneath each individual plan that you may choose to move forward with? Item number 3 to consider when you're looking through potentially buying a Medicare plan is some of the other coverage that may exist out there for you. So many folks have worked for a company and have retired medical that might be their primary insurance in retirement. And so understanding how that interacts with another Medicare plan that you may be purchasing, what plan might run primary and secondary is one key consideration. Other items that are maybe more voluntary, so gap coverage that you might want to purchase within many times considered what they call Medigap plans to mitigate blind spots that you may have within your, let's say, call it traditional Medicare plan. So we want to understand the interactions of coverages, what coverages you have, and then really looking through, especially when we talk Part D or your RX or your prescription drugs, all of these different potential plans that you may have access to, how do they interact with each other? And that's a critical component and one that you really want to utilize side by side with your Medicare professional. Point number 4, and this is one I just referenced a little bit in point number 3 here, but this is one of the most costly items for folks in retirement on Medicare, and that is prescription drugs. So with traditional Medicare, that is Medicare Part D. You might be able to get a Medicare Advantage plan that has everything baked into one singular policy. But when I say prescription drugs, it's thinking through, hey, do you have medicines that you need to take on a regular basis? I'm talking high blood pressure, potentially if you have an autoimmune disease and you need an infusion or something like that. It's really critical to get a list of all of those prescription drugs and run those by your Medicare professional to ensure you have full coverage on those items. And if not, you should probably be considering a different type of policy. So item number 5, thinking through doctor and hospital choice. This is a big one. So a few questions to ask as you're going through and choosing these policies and going on Medicare is, do your doctors accept the Medicare coverage or whatever plan you're choosing? Are the doctors you want accepting new patients if you have to change doctors when you go into the Medicare age? Can you choose your own hospital, or are you going to be forced into a specific hospital if something dramatic happens in your life? And finally, do you need to get referrals to see specialists within the plans? And a lot of this is baked into whatever Medicare plan you choose. Again, super important to go over these options and items with your Medicare professional prior to accepting a specific plan. Point number 6, just thinking through quality of care. Are you satisfied with your medical care or not? Do you have the option to buy a plan that may provide higher levels of service and coverage ideas than your current plan, you know? And a lot of this changes each year. So we see a lot of folks every single year during open enrollment. Sometimes they're bouncing around from different plan to different plan, and just kind of thinking through not just the coverage that you want, but the level of service that you want is going to be mission critical to making sure your care is as high of a level as possible. And obviously that's going to come off many times with the trade-off with the premium that you may pay to access those services along the way. And point number 7, last but not least, is how much do you want to travel in retirement or after you're age 65 on Medicare? Understanding where your Medicare policies may be accepted or not throughout the world is really, really important. A lot of folks, you know, will be covered for short periods of time, internationally speaking. But if you want to go live, let's say, for 6 months a year in Costa Rica, that may be a completely different conversation than if you were just vacationing a few times a year. So understanding coverage outside of the US, coverage within the US, if you're a West Coaster, are you fully covered on the East Coast? Those types of things are going to be really mission critical to making sure that you feel comfortable and that you're fully covered regardless of your travel desires and experiences, you know, at 65 and older. So thanks again for listening to us this week. Again, we had a Medicare Lunch and Learn this last week. We've already done 8 to 9 of them this year. We're already working on 2024. So we're gonna continue to push out a lot of content, a lot of Lunch and Learns. Medicare will always be a staple that we cover. So if you missed us this year, please look for it next, probably October in 2024 when we revisit it. We would just say, we highly recommend working with a Medicare professional that's all they do. So they have a really nice, solid, comprehensive understanding of options for you and talking through the pros and cons of each individual policy. Hope this helps. See you next week.